the designer of these systems, I am a Christian, I think it's very likely to be God. I already believe in God, and I think that's a very reasonable idea. However, somebody who is skeptical might say that they think, say, the sophisticated machinery of the cell was designed by a space alien, a really smart space alien, perhaps Mr. Spock or somebody from Star Trek. And that's because when you look at molecular machinery in the cell, or if you looked at a watch that William Paley talked about in his watchmaker argument, you can see the intelligence behind it, but there is no name inscribed on the mechanism. There's no names on the molecular machine or in the DNA of the cell. And so all you really can conclude is that the designer, it was a being that had enough intelligence to be able to design the systems that you see. However, it might have much more intelligence too. But you cannot use what we see in nature to scientifically conclude that there was a cause beyond nature. We can only say that we observe intelligence. Now, this is not to say that we humans cannot reason from our observations of nature to God or a higher being, but we would have to use the methods of philosophy and theology and history to help guide our thinking. We would have to think outside of simple science, which is restricted to a rather mundane level of description. Let me give you another example to show the difficulties in concluding exactly who the designer was from the scientific evidence. About 10 or 20 years ago, the journal Nature, which is the most prominent science journal in the world, published a fiction story by a science writer. And the gist of the story was that everyone had finally agreed that the universe was designed and all the life in the universe was designed. But they said the designer was a physicist from a superior universe, and that somehow it used physics to make the universe. It was a silly story, but for our purposes here, it shows that you can't go directly from the design to identify the designer. Who designed it, how it was designed, when it was designed, and a number of other questions are very interesting, and perhaps we can figure out the answers to them at some point. But the question of whether something was designed is completely separate from those, and you see that immediately in the system that you're observing. As a matter of fact, you wouldn't ask those other questions of who designed it, how it was designed, and so on, if you didn't know it was designed in the first place, or really looked like it was designed. So the question of design is separate from a scientific question of who the designer was. But I think philosophy and theology can certainly help us in inferring who the designer was.